So I've been listening to a lot of Queen these past few months for no particular reason, and I thought it might be fun to rank all of their albums. It seems like kind of a no-brainer because they are like my third favorite band. My first favorite band is Gorillaz, and I've ranked all of their albums. My second favorite band is The Good, The Bad, and The Queen, and I can't rank all of their albums because there are only 2 of them. And my third favorite band is Queen, so today I'm going to be ranking every single album that they've ever released. Kind of. I'm not including compilation albums or live albums because if I did, we would be here all day. So I'm only including the 15 studio albums that Queen has released, which will probably still take a long time. But before we get started, please allow me a moment to go on a brief tangent about We Will Rock You! I hate to do this so early on in the video, but I really have no other opportunity to talk about this on my channel. We Will Rock You is a jukebox musical with a soundtrack composed entirely of Queen songs, although the story itself is only partially related to the band, just like how this brief tangent is only partially related to the rest of the video. For some reason, even though I've been obsessed with Queen for years, I never bothered to seek this musical out, but I like Queen, and I like jukebox musicals now, I guess, so recently I went online and watched every clip of We Will Rock You I could get my hands on, and I have some thoughts that I would like to share with the class. I'm not going to be including any spoilers, not necessarily because I think you should go and watch it yourself, but because I cannot explain this plot to you in a concise and digestible way. I will say that the premise is very creative, and overall I was pretty impressed with the song selection. The musical opens with innuendo, which in the grand scheme of things is kind of a deep cut, so my expectations were pretty high. This isn't going to be a bland, bare-bones plot with a bunch of Queen's greatest hits thrown in with no rhyme or reason. This musical might actually be good. So as I was watching, I started making predictions of which song they were going to play next based on the dialogue and the setting of each scene, and I was super wrong every time. The play takes place in this futuristic world where everything is run by technology, so I thought, okay, they're going to play Machines or Back to Humans. But no, they just did Radio Gaga with different kind of stupid lyrics. And then there's a scene where the main character, whose name is Galileo Figaro, by the way, is going on this whole rant. And he's like, ugh, I feel like I'm going crazy. That's how he talks. And then I was like, okay, they're gonna play I'm Going Slightly Mad. And then they didn't. I think they did like Under Pressure or something. And they also kept teasing snippets of songs and not playing them, like Death on Two Legs and Ogre Battle, really getting my hopes up for no reason. But it got me thinking though, like a whole musical number or even a whole musical that takes place in the fictional world of Rhye would be super cool. You have plenty of material that you could draw from with Queen's first 2 albums, although I guess a play like that really wouldn't appeal to a wider audience. And then that got me thinking, like, what if down the line they make a biopic about Queen and they have a whole sequence that takes place inside Freddie's imagination with like a fantasy musical sequence that takes place in Rhye, and we can kind of see his sketches and his fantasies like coming to life, you know, because Freddie Mercury was a creative and inventive person and a movie about him should also be creative and inventive. That would be a cool thing to include if they ever made a Queen biopic. But no such thing exists. Thus concludes a brief tangent about We Will Rock You.
Go to hell.
Okay, so we're finally moving into the ranking proper, and I have got a boiling hot take for you guys. I don't think Flash Gordon is very good. I'm going to move through this quickly because I just listened to the album and I cannot remember anything from it. This is a soundtrack album, so it's kind of meant to be supplementary material for the movie Flash Gordon, but this is a ranking of Queen albums, and I am judging this album based on how well it stands on its own, which is not very well. There are huge chunks of this album that are just dialogue from the film, which absolutely can work in a soundtrack album. Pinball Wizard from the Rocket Man soundtrack is the first example that comes to my mind.
People don't pay to see Reginald Dwight. They pay to see Elton John.
I should say that I haven't seen either film that Queen did the soundtrack for, even though both soundtrack albums will be on this list, so that may also affect my ranking of it. Lastly though, I just want to say that it is impressive that Queen has released 15 albums and every single one of them has at least one hit, and on this album it was obviously Flash. My favorite track on this album is, well, it's Flash, because what else would it be, really? I've got another hot take for you guys. Hot Space is also pretty bad. But it's not as bad as everyone says. It's just kind of different. Hot Space is to Queen as The Magic Whip is to Blur, if that makes sense, or as Victim of Love is to Elton John. They're very different from what these artists are usually known for, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're bad. At least not in my opinion. I actually think a Queen disco album is a great idea on paper, but unfortunately there aren't any real standouts on this album besides Under Pressure. It's just like, it's mush. It's mushy. It's like plain oatmeal, which sounds mean, but it's really not that bad. I honestly enjoyed it more than I expected when I listened to it for this ranking, and I would definitely encourage you to give it a second or even first listen. Also listen to The Magic Whip, and Victim of Love, and the Rocket Man soundtrack. My favorite track on this album is Under Pressure, because what else would it be?
One sweep, one front, one clap, one trigger.
A Kind of Magic is the second and final soundtrack album on this list, but I think it's strong enough to stand on its own. I think this is probably because it's not solely the soundtrack to Highlander, it's more so based on that soundtrack, and it doesn't include hardly any audio from the film. In fact, you could listen to a song like One Vision completely divorced from the context of the Highlander soundtrack, mostly because it has nothing to do with Highlander, but probably also because the lyrics are so generic it could be about literally anything. This is probably the corniest Queen album. Like, some of these lyrics are so funny. Friends will be friends is probably the worst offender. Friends will be friends right till the end. Wow, incredible. Some of the best songwriting I've ever heard, right up there with When It Rains, the Rain Falls Down from Amarina. Great job, Bernie, you fucking killed that. If Hot Space is oatmeal, A Kind of Magic is kind of like a Big Mac. It's not like fine dining or anything, but it is a lot of fun. I think. I've never had a Big Mac. It's also worth noting that this was the final Queen album to have a corresponding tour. They did release 2 more albums in Freddie's lifetime, but at that point his health had already begun to decline, and therefore they didn't tour after 1986. My 3 favorite songs on this album are Friends Will Be Friends, One Vision, and A Kind of Magic. Queen by Queen was the very first Queen album by Queen, and I love it. In many ways, it feels like a first draft or a sketch of what would later become Queen 2. There's this quote from 2D, the fictional singer from Gorillaz, about the difference between their first album, Gorillaz, and their second album, Demon Days. He said that Demon Days was like someone had taken the first album and colored it in, and you could absolutely make that same comparison with Queen and Queen 2. I really like the metal influence present in this album. I absolutely love the fairy tale theme that Queen and other bands like Led Zeppelin were doing at the time, with songs like Great King Rat or My Fairy King, which, by the way, oh my god. I've always thought of My Fairy King as the first real Queen song. It has so many of what would later become the hallmarks of their sound. The harmonies and overdubs, the storytelling, Roger's falsetto, Freddie's piano. My Fairy King was literally the origin of Freddie Mercury's stage name. Freddie Mercury wasn't Freddie Mercury until he wrote this song. My Fairy King is one of my all-time favorite Queen songs. I think it's super underrated, and I think this song and the story behind it would be a cool thing to include in a Queen biopic if they ever end up making one. Oh, Dexter Fletcher could direct it! My 3 favorite songs on this album are My Fairy King, Keep Yourself Alive, and Liar. Made in Heaven is the final Queen album, and it is the only Queen album released after Freddie Mercury's death. And in my opinion, it was the best possible way to end things. Freddie had wanted to make as much music as possible before his death, and I think he would have wanted these songs to see the light of day. Made in Heaven doesn't feel at all like a cash grab. It was truly a labor of love. And it's really impressive considering that the remaining members of the band were mostly working with whatever Freddie had been able to record before his death. It's very carefully put together, it's very well written and well performed. A lot of the songs here are really solid, like I Was Born to Love You, which, hear me out. But the real standout is Mother Love. Freddie and Brian had written the song together, and Freddie had recorded the first 2 verses, which you hear on the album. However, these verses were recorded just a few months before his death, and at that point he was very weak. After recording these 2 verses, he left the studio and went home to rest, and then he never came back. Brian May then recorded the final verse, and it's honestly one of the most emotionally moving moments of Queen's entire discography. The outro of the song is a sound collage featuring samples from every single song Queen had ever recorded, with clips from Freddie's live performances and solo career thrown in. It feels very full circle, like a highlight reel. I think the more unorthodox nature of Made in Heaven really suits the theme of the album and the circumstances it was recorded in. For example, the final track on the album is untitled, although it's more commonly known as track 13. It's a hidden track and is also the longest Queen song by far, running for 22.5 minutes. It mostly consists of ambient synthesizers and samples of Freddie's voice, and it concludes with Freddie simply saying,
Fab.
This is, in my opinion, the perfect conclusion to the final Queen album. Made in Heaven is a beautiful listening experience and a wonderful tribute to Freddie. My 3 favorite tracks on the album are Mother Love, A Winter's Tale, and track 13.
Anyway,
if I were ranking these albums solely based on their album covers like I did with Gorillaz, The Miracle would be dead last. What the fuck is that? I understand what they were going for because this was kind of the band transitioning into sharing songwriting credits, but it's just strange. It is so strange. This album in general is just kind of strange. The band was dealing with kind of a lot at the time. Brian May was dealing with issues in his marriage, and Freddie had recently been diagnosed with HIV, and I think this unfortunately resulted in a very mixed bag. I don't want to say that Party is the worst song Queen ever released. I don't want to say that. On the other hand, a lot of this album is pretty good. I love The Invisible Man. I think it's such an interesting premise, and I love how Freddie names each band member at different points in the song, and they all get their own little moment. It's just kind of fun. Also, the guitar solo is crazy. I don't know enough about guitar to know how difficult it actually is to play, but to me it sounds insane. I also think the opening to Breakthrough, which was originally a song all on its own, is one of the best and most beautiful instances of those signature Queen harmonies. I also want to mention the music video for the album's title track, The Miracle, which features younger versions of the band. The child version of Freddie Mercury was played by Ross McCall, who later went on to star in Band of Brothers, along with friend of the channel, Dexter Fletcher. And later on down the line, a sequel series to Band of Brothers was released titled The Pacific, which starred Joe Mazzello and Rami Malek. I'm about to blow this whole thing wide open. Although I guess it doesn't matter, really. I mean, what do Dexter Fletcher, Joe Mazzello, and Rami Malek have to do with Queen? My 3 favorite tracks on the album are The Invisible Man, I Want It All, and Breakthrough.
I am the champion of the world.
If I were ranking these albums solely based on their covers, this one would also not be very high on the list. I don't like Frank. You can give him a cute little name, you can bring him out on stage, I don't care. I know what he did. Honestly, I don't like News of the World so much. I almost never listen to it. The only song I genuinely love from this album is Sleeping on the Sidewalk, but I had to rank it above albums I personally like better because it's News of the World. We Will Rock You, We Are the Champions, come on. It's not that I don't like these songs, but I've just heard them so often that they don't even register as songs anymore. Just something you hear at sporting events and also when watching the cinematic masterpiece that is Chicken Little. I don't have a lot to say about this album. My 3 favorite tracks on the album are Sleeping on the Sidewalk, It's Late, and Get Down, Make Love.
What's that saying? The show's gotta go all over the place or something.
I do have a lot to say about Innuendo. This was the final album released before Freddie's death, and as such, there's a real sense of finality to this album, even if it wasn't the last album released under the Queen name. A lot of the album deals with Freddie's declining health, public speculation on his condition, and the scrutiny he faced as a result. I think Innuendo serves as a fitting end to the band's career, specifically Freddie Mercury's career, and in a lot of ways it's a beautiful swan song from Freddie. Headlong and I Can't Live With You are just as strong as any of their earlier work, and I really, really love I'm Going Slightly Mad. It's become one of my favorite Queen songs of all time. I love the way Freddie sounds in this song, but there's this vibrato he does in the verses that honestly, it sounds like a You Know Miles song.
You're missing that one final screw.
He in Indiana, he not Indiana Jones.
And that's not a bad thing. It's actually a compliment. But jokes aside, I really admire Freddie's ability to look at such a bleak situation in such a lighthearted way. I'm Going Slightly Mad was written about the cognitive decline that Freddie was experiencing, and even still he manages to put a positive spin on it, coming up with all these crazy euphemisms to convey the fact that he's losing his mind. And the instrumental just plods along, marching towards this inevitable conclusion. It's really very tragic. A lot of the songs on Innuendo can easily be read as Freddie saying his goodbyes. There's Bayou, which could potentially be about his partner, Jim Hutton, and there's Delilah, which he wrote about his favorite cat. I know a lot of people hate this song, and I completely understand why. However, Freddie wrote this song knowing he had a very limited amount of time left to live. He was very sick, and he was in a lot of pain, and the one thing that brought him joy was his favorite little kitty cat. So I just can't bring myself to hate this song. I love Delilah, and I'll defend it forever. And while Innuendo feels like Freddie saying goodbye, it also feels like the remaining members of Queen saying goodbye to Freddie. Brian May wrote The Show Must Go On with Freddie in mind, knowing that he was facing death and refusing to break down or give up. The music video for These Are the Days of Our Lives marked Freddie's final appearance on video. This song was written by Roger Taylor, reminiscing on his history with Freddie and the friendship they had. The video was filmed in black and white to disguise Freddie's appearance, as they had done before for I'm Going Slightly Mad. The song, the video, and the situation are all incredibly sad, and Freddie chose to face it with dignity. I've touched on this in a previous video, but Freddie Mercury's ability to remain optimistic and resilient while dealing with a terminal illness and being harassed by the press about it until the day he died was absolutely incredible. I can't even imagine what that must have been like. Is Innuendo Queen's best album? No, but it's an important part of their history nonetheless, and it's a glimpse into the band's mentality and outlook at the end of Freddie Mercury's life. My 3 favorite tracks on this album are I'm Going Slightly Mad, The Show Must Go On, and you know what? Delilah. Delilah is one of my favorites. I feel good about that decision. Like I said earlier, in a lot of ways, Queen 2 is just Queen, but better. Remember what I said earlier? It's like Queen, but colored in. Queen 2 feels much more fleshed out and ambitious. It continues that fairy tale theme. It mostly takes place in the world of Rye, featuring all kinds of fantastical creatures like ogres, fairies, queens, like real queens, like monarchs. Early Queen has such a unique energy to it, especially their first 2 albums. It's so interesting to see where they started and to see the origin of so many musical techniques that they would become famous for. My 3 favorite tracks on this album are Ogre Battle, 7 Seas of Rye, and Father to Son.
A drag queen! I am the queen of drag!
Similar to A Kind of Magic, The Works has kind of a goofy charm to it. If A Kind of Magic is a Big Mac, this is like a McCrispy. I don't know, I'm getting kind of lost in this metaphor. The Works is, above all else, very earnest. It's almost over the top in its earnestness and sentimentality, but I think that's why I like it so much. A lot of the lyrics on this album are almost too uplifting, but there is something so reassuring and inspiring about lines like, "You've yet to have your finest hour." Keep Passing the Open Windows is probably my favorite song from this album. It is a bit cheesy, but I think it's the best example of the kitschy vibe of this album. Also, as an American, I have to mention the music video for I Want to Break Free, which infamously featured the band dressed in drag as a parody of the popular British TV show Coronation Street. And America did not get the joke, and they did not like the video. Queen wasn't able to win back their American audience until after Freddie died and after Wayne's World came out. And again, as an American, guys, come on, we're better than this. Actually, I don't know if that's true. The Works doesn't leave you with as much to think about or reflect on as previous entries in the list, but it will leave you in a good mood for the rest of the day. My 3 favorite tracks on this album are Keep Passing the Open Windows, Hammer to Fall, and Machines, or Back to Humans.
Wish they raced wooden horses at the Kentucky Derby. The Kentucky Derby?
A Day at the Races is obviously meant to be a counterpart to A Night at the Opera, which we'll talk about later. Now, making a follow-up to your previous album with an extremely similar title and cover is a very bold choice, and this could have easily been a failed attempt at trying to capture lightning in a bottle a second time. But A Day at the Races doesn't feel derivative at all, and it's actually, in my opinion, one of their most impressive albums by far. Other than Somebody to Love, A Day at the Races has several hidden gems that aren't talked about as often as I feel they should be. Long Away is my favorite Queen song, like I mean it this time, and it's one of my favorite songs, period. I think it's so beautiful and so underrated. It's not a masterwork on the level of some of their other songs, but I absolutely adore it. If you haven't heard it, you should definitely check it out. I think a lot of non-Queen fans don't really realize that Bohemian Rhapsody was kind of the tip of the iceberg. They have a ton of songs in the same vein as Bohemian Rhapsody, but on an even larger scale. I think this complexity and intricacy is part of what makes Queen really special. The Millionaire Waltz is another one of those Bohemian Rhapsody-esque tracks, and it was allegedly written about John Reid. You know, I had to bring that up. You and I was written by John Deacon, and I find his songwriting here to be very charming. And then there's Good Old-Fashioned Loverboy, which isn't exactly a hidden gem, but it is another one of my very favorites. A Day at the Races is pretty close to a perfect album, and it's a really impressive follow-up to A Night at the Opera, which, again, we'll get to later. My 5 favorite tracks on this album are Long Away, Good Old-Fashioned Loverboy, You and I, Drowse, and The Millionaire Waltz. I honestly was not expecting jazz to be this high on my list, but going through this album, there are so many songs here that I absolutely love. I mentioned earlier that every single Queen album has at least one hit song, but Jazz is one of the few Queen albums where I feel like the biggest hits on the album are some of the worst songs on the track list. That's not to say they're bad, there's just such stiff competition. There's really not a single bad track on this album, except Fat Bottom Girls, which I personally just don't like. Much like A Day at the Races, there are a ton of songs from Jazz that I think are extremely underrated and overlooked. Jealousy is very moody and melodramatic. If You Can't Beat 'Em is another song by John Deacon that has a really fun, upbeat energy and a great hook. Dreamer's Ball was written by Brian May as a tribute to Elvis Presley, and as a result, it feels very bittersweet and reminiscent of the 50s and 60s. Leaving Home Ain't Easy was also written by Brian May, and this song was kind of a crutch for me when I left home. So was Class of 2013 by Mitski. It seems crazy to say that the album that gave us Fat Bottom Girls, Bicycle Race, and Don't Stop Me Now is underrated, but if you have the time, I would definitely take the opportunity to listen to Jazz front to back, especially if you're not already super familiar with Queen's music. My 5 favorite tracks on this album are Dreamer's Ball, Dead on Time, If You Can't Beat 'Em, Jealousy, and Leaving Home Ain't Easy. Right off the bat, I just want to say that it's absolutely crazy that in only 7 years, Queen released 8 albums and they're all good. The Game was their 8th album, and it was also their first album to use synthesizers, which is kind of a big deal. Up until this point, the band had always prided themselves on creating these elaborate vocal and musical effects and tricks without using any synthesizers. They even included it in the liner notes of every single one of their previous albums. And a lot of these previous albums were based around a specific concept or take place in a particular world. The Game is just a collection of songs, but in my opinion, these songs are some of the strongest in their discography. Dragon Attack is super catchy, and I think that's just because it's built around this really meaty guitar hook. Also, the bass solo is crazy. I don't have anything to say about Another One Bites the Dust, really. That's the thing about Queen. Their most popular songs are songs that literally everyone in the entire world has heard. I will say that I think it's cool that John Deacon just wanted to write a song about cowboys. I guess he was channeling his inner Bernie Taupin, and it ended up becoming such a huge hit. And it's cool that the song was only released as a single because Michael Jackson told them to. Need Your Loving Tonight is my favorite song on the album, and it was also written by John Deacon. The lyrics are a little on the cheesy side, and I honestly can't explain why I like it so much. I just do, I'm sorry. I also love Sail Away Sweet Sister, which was written by Brian May for the sister he never had. It's a really sweet sentiment until you get to the line, "I'll always be in love with you." Dude. I'll give him a pass because I know he never had a sister and I know what he meant, but word to the wise, don't tell your sister you're in love with her. Don't be in love with your sister at all. Can't believe I'm giving out this advice for free. And then there's Don't Try Suicide, which is just so weird. It's a weird song. On one hand, it seems like too unserious of an approach for such a serious topic. On the other hand, the song is clearly anti-suicide, which is great. I'm pro anything that's anti-suicide. On one hand, the lyrics are so cold and callous, but on the other hand, it's a little bit funny. My 5 favorite tracks on this album are Need Your Loving Tonight, Dragon Attack, Sail Away Sweet Sister, Play the Game, and Don't Try Suicide, which is good advice. This may not be the number 1 spot, but Sheer Heart Attack is my favorite Queen album. When I look back on all 15 Queen albums, this one stands out as the Queen album. Everything about its sound and its look is definitive of what I think of as Queen. In my opinion, this is a perfect album. It's hard to believe that Sheer Heart Attack was released just months after Queen 2 because it is such a massive step forward in every way. It leans into a greater variety of musical genres and styles, it moves away from the more fantastical influences of Queen and Queen 2 while retaining the best elements of it. It really feels like Queen coming into their own and entering their prime. The album covers a wide range of topics, from fame and exploitation to premature ejaculation. I built the whole video around that joke, so I hope you liked it. There is not a single bad song on this album. Brighton Rock is the best opener of any Queen album and the best guitar solo of any Queen track. Killer Queen was the band's first hit single and remains one of their best in my opinion. It was the song that first got me really hooked on Queen. Flick of the Wrist is one of the most energetic songs on the album, it's one of the most fun to sing, and I love the transition from Tenement Funster into Flick of the Wrist into Lily of the Valley. In the Lap of the Gods is another one of my all-time favorite Queen songs. This song is wild. It has the drama, the glamour, the edge, the falsetto. I don't understand how Roger even does that. I know I couldn't do it. Actually, let me try it real quick. Never mind. Nope, never mind. Stone Cold Crazy is very exciting and up-tempo and was a precursor to both speed and thrash metal. Misfire is the first Queen song written solely by John Deacon, and it is literally about premature ejaculation. The official lyric video is so funny. Bring Back That Leroy Brown is a jangly little ditty that pairs surprisingly well with the heavier songs on the album. I also think She Makes Me, Stormtrooper in Stilettos, is super underrated. I love the vocals from Brian May and the guitars throughout. And not only does Sheer Heart Attack have the best opener of any Queen album, it has the best closer with In the Lap of the Gods, Revisited. This is one of my favorite album closers ever. It's one of the first Queen songs that feels like a big moment, and it feels like a precursor of their more arena-ready songs like We Will Rock You or We Are the Champions. I love Sheer Heart Attack. It feels very theatrical, very sleek, very dark at points, very light at points. It represents everything Queen should be. My 5 favorite tracks on the album are In the Lap of the Gods, In the Lap of the Gods Revisited, Flick of the Wrist, She Makes Me, Stormtrooper in Stilettos, and Misfire.
So without further ado,
Let's go!
As much as I love Sheer Heart Attack, there was no other option. A Night at the Opera is Queen's best album by far, and one of the best albums ever made from any genre. It's truly bonkers bananas that the album ended up so good, given its extremely troubled production. Without a stable foundation, a troubled production can absolutely ruin a project and turn it into an awful experience for both creator and audience. When the band began work on A Night at the Opera, they were in a really tough spot. Because of issues with their manager, Norman Sheffield, Queen had barely received any of the money made from their previous 3 albums. They were all broke, and if A Night at the Opera ended up being a flop, they were pretty much screwed. They were trying to negotiate their way out of their previous contract and searching for new management, which they eventually found in John Reid, who you may already know was Elton John's manager at the time. The two were also really good friends. In the midst of all of this, Queen was recording the album, which ended up becoming the most expensive album ever made at the time of its release. I think this whole situation would be a really interesting conflict to include in a Queen biopic, but there isn't one. It doesn't exist. Maybe if I keep telling myself it doesn't exist, then maybe I'll finally be happy. I want you to imagine that you are a member of Queen. You're flat broke, caught up in legal drama, and you and your band are spending a ludicrous amount of money recording your newest album. Understandably, you are very stressed. Now I want you to imagine that one day your bandmate comes into the studio and says, "I've written a song for the album. It's 6 minutes long, and it sounds insane. And I want it to be the lead single." I don't know about you, but I would have lost my goddamn mind. But that's exactly what happened, and to their credit, the rest of Queen was in support of Bohemian Rhapsody being the lead single. And it was, and it became unbelievably successful. A Night at the Opera became unbelievably successful. And most importantly, Queen became unbelievably successful. There is no Queen without A Night at the Opera. This album is the pinnacle of their creativity and their talent. Just like Sheer Heart Attack, every song on this album is perfect. Not a single second is wasted. Death on Two Legs is an incredibly vicious track written by Freddie about Norman Sheffield, their former manager. Like, oh my god! And then we go straight into Lazing on a Sunday Afternoon, which is a jolly little tune about a guy who likes painting and going to the zoo. This is one of the greatest albums ever made. And I'm in Love with My Car is actually pretty fun. I like it, although I'm not sure it's worth locking yourself in a cupboard for. You're My Best Friend was written by John Deacon for his wife, Veronica. It's very sweet, very cute, but you don't fool me, John. I've heard Misfire. 39 is a more folksy tune, and I think it's one of my favorite examples of pure storytelling in any song from any artist. I made a very long video a few months ago in which I talked about Brian May many times, and I don't think I said even one nice thing about him. So let me just say that Brian May is one of the most talented guitarists who have ever lived. He has a wonderful singing voice, and I think he's the most talented songwriter in the group. In fact, you may have noticed some of my favorite songs throughout all of these albums are ones that he wrote and or sang, like 39. He also wrote Sweet Lady, which is fine, I guess. Seaside Rendezvous is another little ditty that feels very similar to Lazing on a Sunday Afternoon, and even bring back that Leroy Brown from their previous album.
Gonna get that cutie pie. Roll along with me, really contemplate.
Seaside Rendezvous also features a section composed entirely of Freddie and Roger making kazoo sounds with their mouths. This is one of the greatest albums ever made. I mentioned a couple times in this video that Queen has several songs that are stylistically similar to Bohemian Rhapsody. And you may assume that of these songs, Bohemian Rhapsody is the best one. But what if I told you it's not? In my opinion, the Prophet song is the best song Queen has ever recorded and one of the greatest songs I have ever heard. If you've never heard it, imagine Bohemian Rhapsody, but longer, with harrowing lyrics about a biblical flood, and also the operatic section is completely a cappella. And the guitar solo towards the end goes so hard that I'm going to risk a copyright strike and just play it for you. This song is awesome, and you should listen to it all the way through as soon as you're done watching this. Love of My Life is one of Queen's most beautiful ballads. Good Company is another quirky little number from Brian. And then there's Bohemian Rhapsody, this big beast of a song. Like, what am I even supposed to say? Everyone knows this song. Everyone knows that it's one of the greatest songs of all time. It's Queen's masterpiece and Freddie Mercury's magnum opus. The album closes with a recording of God Save the Queen, and that's it. That's A Night at the Opera. My favorite tracks on this album are The Prophet Song, 39, Death on Two Legs, Bohemian Rhapsody, and Good Company. So that's my ranking of all 15 Queen albums. This video is so much longer than I thought it would be. Let me know in the comments if you agree or disagree with any of my opinions, and definitely listen to these albums if you haven't already. I had so much fun going back and listening to them for like the millionth time. Queen was one of the greatest bands of all time, and it's hard to even imagine a world without their music or their massive presence in day-to-day life. Their music is ubiquitous. It's something everyone knows and understands. There's this video of Bohemian Rhapsody being played over the speakers at a Green Day concert, and this audience of thousands of people is singing along to every single word. I think that's proof of the legacy that Queen and Freddie Mercury have left. Queen was a group of 4 people that were the best of the best in their respective talents, and who also worked so much better together than any one of them did alone. That doesn't happen often. Not every album of theirs was perfect. They made weird choices and missteps like any other band, but in every other sense, I don't think there will ever be another band quite like Queen. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to give it a thumbs up, and if you enjoyed me, be sure to subscribe to my channel. If you want, you can even turn notifications on so you'll be the first to know when I'm lazing on a Sunday afternoon. Anyways, that's going to be all from me. I've got to go waltzing to the zoo. Bye!